The iPhone 13 Pro Max is now 1 year old and has been a darn solid upgrade, bringing the long-awaited 120Hz display to the iPhone, as well as a huge leap forward in terms of battery life. I've been using it myself for a few weeks now after finding a cracker of a deal on Facebook Marketplace for an almost new one. And so, before it's replaced by the iPhone 14 Pro Max in just a couple of days, let's take a look at how it's held up over the past year. And by the way, timestamps are in the description if you'd like to see something specific. So first up, let's talk design. Well, for starters, if you have small hands, you should probably steer clear of this phone, because it's an absolute unit. It measures in at a whopping 6.7 inches, weighs 240 grams, and is 7.65 millimeters thick. So it is far from the most portable phone out there. It's basically just a rebadged iPad mini at this point. For a lot of people, this is just going to be way too big. It's considerably heavy and bulky to hold, and typing and navigating around the phone with one hand is a bit of a workout, although the heft does make it feel premium and well built, like it's not going to break in half or anything. But of course, if it's too big, the smaller 6.1-inch 13 Pro might be a better choice. The rest of the design though is pretty unchanged from last year's 12 Pro Max, albeit still absolutely gorgeous and solid, with the stainless steel edges, frosted matte glass back, and huge cameras, which have gotten just comically large by now. And it makes something like the 11 Pro Max camera bump look minuscule, even though that was considered to be obnoxious when it came out in 2019. The only area on the 13 Pro Max where there's really a noticeable visible change is in the smaller notch. Yep, Apple finally decided to do something about that notch by moving the earpiece speaker up the top and cramming the Face ID gear and selfie camera closer together. Although, if I'm going to be completely honest, even though it is an improvement on paper, it doesn't make too much of a difference in everyday life. There's still a notch, and you're still going to notice it, but on the other hand, for a phone with this much screen real estate, it's not really a big deal. But yeah, as you'd expect, it's a really premium looking and feeling design with high-end materials and a very solid feel in the hand. It's literally like a piece of jewelry, especially in this gold color, which is my iPhone color of choice, although we also do get silver, space gray, and two new colors, Sierra Blue and Midnight Green. On the side we have our power and volume buttons along with the mute switch, and depending on your location, you may have a little oval thingy on the side as well, which is an antenna for the 5G connectivity. On the bottom, we get the lightning port along with two speakers, which sound absolutely incredible for a smartphone. I thought the ones on my 11 Pro Max were terrific, but these are just a whole nother league in terms of sound clarity and richness. Like, if you forget your Bluetooth speaker, you could literally just listen to music on here. But yeah, all in all, again, really high-end and solid design. Some might find that camera bump to be a bit clunky, but it's all in the name of taking better pictures and video. But we'll get to that soon enough. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the display, which is top of the line, especially since the 13 Pros added the very overdue upgrade of a high refresh rate. It's a 6.7-inch OLED panel with a resolution of 1284 by 2778, along with a pixel density of 458 pixels per inch, so it's incredibly sharp and crispy, and all of your content is going to look amazing, with no visible pixels whatsoever, and the immersive 6.7-inch size makes it a great phone for consuming content on, like movies, videos, or articles. But apart from that, again, the 13 Pro displays have finally implemented a high refresh rate, which they probably should have done in like 2019, but hey, you know, better late than never. Basically, this means that the screen is now moving at 120 frames per second instead of 60. It's a really nice experience. Unfortunately, I can't show it on screen as this video is only at 30 frames per second, but as you can see from this slow-mo, the 120Hz refresh rate on the 13 Pro lags a ton less than the 60Hz panel on the right. Like, literally go into a phone store and try it for yourself. It is worth seeing that difference in person before you buy. I mean, it's by no means an essential feature, but it makes the phone experience just that much more pleasant, especially if you're coming from an Android, which I'm 99% sure would have had a high refresh rate already. Plus, it's not just any high refresh rate system, but it's what Apple calls ProMotion, where the refresh rate, or frame rate of the screen, will vary to save battery life depending on the situation. For example, if you're scrolling through Instagram, it'll be at its full 120Hz. However, if you stop scrolling and nothing on the screen is moving, it can go all the way down to 10Hz, because obviously if nothing is moving, 120Hz won't make a difference, and so this can save you some extra battery. Actually, speaking of battery, the doubled refresh rate actually doesn't drain the battery like some people thought it would. In fact, the battery life has actually improved a lot, but again, more on that later. Props to Apple for not sacrificing battery life for refresh rate though. In addition, this display also gets really bright, peaking at 1200 nits, so you'll be able to use it in bright sunny outdoor environments without any issues. All in all, this display ticks every box. It's sharp, it's big, it's got a high refresh rate, and it gets really bright. So there's really no issues at all with it, apart from maybe the notch, but we've been dealing with that for years. It's nothing we're not used to. And now, let's talk about probably the most hyped up aspect about any new iPhone, the camera setup. And I mean, where do I even begin here? There is just an absolute cluster of stuff to cover. So strap yourselves in. On the rear, we get a triple camera setup as we've been getting for a while, 12 megapixel main, ultra wide, telephoto and selfie cameras, and 12 megapixels might sound pretty small as of now, but the actual quality of the cameras definitely outweighs that. Plus, there's also quite a few cool new knickknacks like macro photography and photographic styles, as well as the telephoto lens now being able to zoom up to 3 times optically instead of just 2, which means you can now zoom in more without losing clarity in the image. So starting off with the main lens, it's absolutely incredible. It can take super amazing photos with great colors, sharpness and detail, and it will hold up for many years to come. It's top of the line, whether you're a professional photographer or just someone wanting to capture their memories. One new feature we do have here though is called photographic styles, which means that you can pre-edit all of your color, exposure and brightness preferences etc. on the viewfinder before you take the photo, and it processes the image with these settings in real time, which is pretty darn cool and a useful feature for avid photographers. In addition, the 13 Pro Max also added macro photography to the iPhone, which allows you to take extreme close-ups of objects to capture really tiny close-up details that you wouldn't normally see, like the veins in a leaf or a fingerprint. And not only is that a cool thing to have, but the images turn out really well too. And on top of these new additions, of course there's also a portrait mode, as there always has been, which works pretty seamlessly thanks to that telephoto lens for depth sensing, and there's really not too much confusion around the edges anymore. When portrait mode was still relatively new, the sensors would sometimes have trouble figuring out what was in front and what was behind around the edges, and so there was a little bit of confusion going on, but nowadays it's all pretty much gone. And plus, there's also night mode on here, which drastically improves low light photography. And this year we saw night mode added on every camera instead of just the main lens. It works amazingly. You can take incredibly clear photos in places with little to no lighting, and it's especially thanks to the larger sensors that it works so well on here. So yeah, really good main lens all in all. We've seen some terrific upgrades on here, and whether you're a pro photographer or not, it'll impress greatly for years to come. Now obviously, the main lens isn't the only attraction here. Of course we also get the ultra-wide and telephoto lens. The ultra-wide, as expected, is also really darn good. You do lose a bit of that fine detail of the picture, and you'll be able to see that if you zoom in, but just looking at it normally, it's honestly terrific. Colors are still maintained, it's just that fine detail that you're missing out on in exchange for a wider field of view. But you know, that doesn't really mean too much, the photo still looks really good. Now the telephoto lens on here has also seen an upgrade, now being able to zoom up to 3 times instead of just 2, and so you can now zoom in further without your image getting pixelated. Although, do keep in mind that while it does preserve the clarity of the image, the telephoto lens is actually not as good as the main one. So you won't get as nice colors or as fine detail, but at the same time, you will be able to see the subject up closer without that pixelation you'd get from the normal lens if you zoomed in digitally, if that makes sense. But you know, it works well enough. Nothing that comes out of the telephoto lens actually looks bad by any means. And lastly, taking a look at the selfie camera, well, it's also about as good as it gets. This camera will capture tons of detail on your face, and if you're someone who likes to post a lot of selfies on social media, then the 13 Pro Max will help you look your best. Portrait mode also works pretty good on here, and because it has night mode, it doesn't matter what kind of lighting situation you were dealt. So yeah, basically, same stuff to report here as the rear cameras. Terrific quality, as you'd expect from a phone this expensive. Now moving on to the video recording, the 13 Pro Max is absolutely insane. As expected, it can shoot in up to 4K at 30 frames per second. That's all pretty standard for a high-end phone, but this year, it's also added in the ability to shoot in ProRes, which is essentially a super high quality format that gathers more data from the video and gives you more control over color correction when editing later on, which is terrific news for mobile filmmakers. However, it does come at a cost, with a single minute of 4K ProRes footage taking up about 6 gigabytes, which is just insane. In fact, you can't actually record in 4K ProRes unless you have 256 gigs of storage or more. So that's worth keeping in mind if you plan to use this phone for videography. In addition, there's also a new feature called cinematic mode, which is basically portrait mode for video. But the cool thing is that not only can you change the focus from the subject in front to the subject behind, and vice versa while shooting, but while editing the video afterwards as well, which is pretty darn neat. Props to Apple for that. Although, with that being said, the focusing can be a bit iffy, and it has trouble focusing around the edges quite a bit, so it is absolutely nowhere near perfect, but if you have the two subjects a significant distance apart, it can look like the real deal. And with the iPhone 14 Pro Max and beyond, or even future software updates, cinematic mode will only improve. But overall, video on here is absolutely fab, terrific stabilization, colors and detail, and it's just a generally great system for filmmakers, or just for capturing memories. I know this camera part was a lot to take in, especially if you don't really know too much about tech specs, but to put it simply, it's an absolutely incredible system with tons of handy knickknacks and features, and it'll be great for years to come. Something else that'll be great for many years to come is the performance. Of course, being a phone this expensive, you'd expect the absolute best when it comes to speed and the ability to handle heavy workloads, and that's pretty much what you get. The iPhone 13 Pro Max sports the Apple A15 chipset along with 6 gigabytes of RAM. This means it'll be able to smash through anything, big or small, with zero issues. Graphically intensive games, running tons of things in the background, mobile video editing, or even just browsing the web, it'll all be extremely fluid and buttery, and it should remain that way for quite a long time. Speaking of quite a long time, that brings me on to another important aspect about the phone, the longevity. iPhones these days already get a ridiculously long life of updates, with the iPhone 6s from 2015 still receiving updates until iOS 16 is officially released very shortly, marking 7 whole years of support. So you're probably looking at software support from Apple until around 2028, 2029, in fact quite likely even longer. So if you're someone who keeps their phone for a long time, then fortunately for you, this phone isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And lastly, moving on to the battery life, the 13 Pro Max is a tank, packing in a 4,352 mAh cell, and it barely even sips its power, being a massive increase from its predecessor. With light use, you could definitely get multiple days out of it, and with heavy to moderate use, definitely a day with room to spare. It is genuinely terrific. I normally get around a whopping 9 to 10 hours of screen time per day. It's literally at the point where I don't even have to worry about checking my battery percentage, or wonder if my phone is charged before I go out later in the day. For example, I used my hotspot at school last week for basically the whole day, and by the end of the day, it was only down to around 85%, which is just mind-blowing. So again, the higher refresh rate display didn't have any ill effects on the battery life. And it's also great how they not only pulled that off, but also drastically improved the battery life from the 12 Pro Max in the process, which was already doing great in terms of battery life. So bottom line, no matter how much of a power user you are, the battery life will never let you down. And so, with everything about the iPhone 13 Pro Max now covered, I think it's pretty safe to say that it absolutely lives up to its premium nature, and its starting price point of $1,099 US. Although if you max out the storage at 1TB, it's a whopping $1,600 US, although I don't know if Apple made too many sales on that one. However, despite the fact that this is one of, if not the best phone of the past year, you shouldn't buy one anymore, because the iPhone 14 series, including the iPhone 14 Pro Max, are about to be released in literally a couple of days, and is speculated to sport vast improvements on mainly the cameras, but also performance and battery life as well, incrementally. I mean, the only reason I got this one was because I found an absolute cracker of a deal on Facebook Marketplace. It was a brand new in-box 256GB model being sold for only $1,400 Australian or around $1,000 USD, which was definitely nothing short of a steal. So if you can find a really good deal like that one, then I'd say go for it, especially since prices on the used market should start to come down after the iPhone 14 Pro Max comes out. Although, if you've got the money to burn, or you want the latest and greatest, or both, then the 14 Pro Max is going to be the obvious choice here. I might also just add that the Pro lineup of iPhones are not the ones that most people should buy. Apple does have the regular iPhone 13 lineup, and will have the regular iPhone 14 lineup, and they're still terrific phones, but don't have as many bells and whistles and are much more affordable. So if you don't need all the fancy camera and display features, then those are definitely more worth looking into if you want to save some cash. But I've said it tons and tons of times in this video, and I'll say it again, it's premium, extremely capable, affordable and reliable, and overall a very pleasant device to use, if you're willing to put a few holes in your wallet. But you know what, if you think you could put all those features to use, then I'd say it's absolutely worth it. And so that pretty much sums up my review of the iPhone 13 Pro Max 1 year later. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Also, if you'd like to see more of me for whatever reason, my Instagram is @tech_spree and my Twitter is @techspree1. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.